They say blood is thicker than water, man, but sometimes water's all you've got. I used to believe that family meant something. They said that if you gave everything, your time, your savings, your loyalty, they'd never turn their back on you. I held on to that belief like a man clings to a fraying rope, suspended over a life he'd spent years building. For over a decade, I worked construction from sunrise to sunset, laid concrete in the summer heat, framed houses in the winter rain, and skipped more lunches than I can count just to squirrel away every dime. Not once did I take a real vacation, never bought the new truck I dreamed of. Just saved, and saved, and saved. Because I had a dream. To own a vineyard. Not just for the grapes or the wine, but because to me it meant peace. Legacy. Something that would last longer than the calluses on my hands, something I could pass on, maybe to a kid of my own one day. Or maybe just to the world, as proof I was here. That I built something that didn't crumble when the paycheck stopped. I'm a man in my 40s now, never married. Not because I didn't want to. Life just got busy. I chose to invest in something permanent, something rooted. While others chased vacations, I chased dirt, good dirt. You earn it, you own it. That's what my old foreman used to say, and I took it to heart. Every coffee I skipped, every overtime shift I picked up, every worn-out boot I refused to replace, it was all for the vineyard. I missed birthdays, bachelor parties, even my best friend's wedding. Folks said I was crazy, but I knew what I was doing. My mom, she understood, I thought. We were close. She made me peanut butter sandwiches even when I was too old for lunch boxes. But she always favored my older brother. Never said it out loud. She didn't have to. It was in the way she looked at him when he walked into a room, like the sun had just risen. Still, I never held it against her. Not really. Love's funny like that. It makes you blind in the kindest ways. When the time finally came, I bought the vineyard. 15 acres outside Napa. A fixer-upper, sure, but with bones strong enough to stand 100 seasons. I remember the day I signed the deed. My hands shook like I was holding a newborn, and I added my mom's name on the paperwork, just as a gesture. Gratitude, you know. She cried when I told her, said, "You didn't have to do that." But her smile stretched wide, and her eyes shimmered. It felt right. At the time, a week later, a letter arrived. It was addressed to someone else. At first I figured it was junk mail, but something about it, I don't know, gut feeling maybe. I opened it. It was a property tax notice for my vineyard. But the name listed wasn't mine. I called the county office, irritated but calm. Figured it was a clerical error. It wasn't. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. "Sir, the deed was legally transferred 2 days ago." "What are you talking about? I never signed anything." She paused. "Well, we have a signature on file." I asked her to fax it over. When it came through, I stared at the paper for 10 full minutes. It was my mother's handwriting. No mistaking it. I've seen it on birthday cards, recipe notes, sticky notes left on the fridge. She'd signed my name, transferred my property. You expect lies from strangers, not from the woman who packed your school lunch. I was still reeling when I learned the second part. My brother, Robert, was now co-owner. Robert, who once called vineyards bougie dirt farms. Robert, who never lifted a shovel unless it was to dig up someone else's gold. There he was, smack in the middle of the paperwork, grinning in the family photo that the lawyer's assistant had uploaded with the announcement on the county website. I remembered a holiday dinner a year ago. He raised a glass of box wine and joked, "What's the point of dirt and grapes unless they're worth something?" Guess he figured out the answer. Did they plan this together? That thought hit harder than the forged signature. The two people I loved most, scheming behind my back. I drove to the vineyard that night, parked just outside the rusted gate. Couldn't bring myself to drive in. I sat in the truck for hours, the dashboard clock ticking louder than it should. I thought of the dream boards I made, the sketches of the tasting room, the binder full of grape varietals and soil reports. Gone. Just like that. I could have stormed in, raised hell, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the final sliver of belief that it was all a misunderstanding. Or maybe I knew I needed more than anger. I needed proof. I needed clarity. I needed to be smarter than they were. I didn't sleep that night. Just sat there. Windows rolled down. Vineyard in view. Smell of spring soil in the air. I gave them everything. Now I'll take back what's mine. Waking up the next morning didn't bring any peace. If anything, it pressed the weight deeper into my chest. The vineyard wasn't in a bad dream I could shake off. It was a fact. My name was off the deed. My brother's was on it. And the signature that sealed it was forged by the woman who used to bandage my knees when I fell off my bike. I sat at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on a cold plate of eggs I hadn't touched. Mail was stacked beside it, unopened. I couldn't make sense of anything. My hand twitched every time I reached for the phone, only to pull back again. Call her. Call him. Call a lawyer. 100 thoughts. No action. I'd been blindsided once. Wasn't about to let it happen twice. Fool me once. Shame on you. Fool me twice. Shame on me. So I did nothing. At least not yet. I decided to watch. To listen. Later that day, I picked up the phone and called my mom. Told her I was just checking in on her health, making sure she was okay. Her voice was smooth as honey. "Oh, I'm fine, sweetheart. Just had some tea and caught up on my shows. You still working long hours?" She played it so casual, so light, not a single crack in her voice, not even a hiccup of guilt. I kept my tone steady, but my throat burned. "Yeah, still keeping busy." She laughed, soft and easy. "Well, don't work yourself to death. That vineyard isn't going anywhere." And there it was, a tiny splinter in the sentence. I paused, listened harder, not to what she said, but what she didn't say. The silence between words says more than the words themselves. We said our goodbyes. I hung up and sat there. It wasn't just her signature. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the performance. The act like nothing had happened. Like I didn't know. Like I hadn't spent the last 10 years building something she handed away like a grocery list. A few days passed before I drove by the vineyard again. I didn't plan to. My truck just seemed to steer itself that direction. From the road, I saw Booker. He was standing by the front gate, gesturing like some CEO giving orders to the contractors who were busy digging, repainting, shifting things around. A brand new sign leaned against the fence. Booker Family Vineyards. Booker, not our family name, not mine, just him. He was laughing with the workers, his arms wide, like he belonged. It's like watching someone move into a house you built with your own hands. I didn't stop, just watched, long enough for the bile to rise in my gut, then drove past, slower than I should have, memorizing every detail. That night, I dug into records again, online, then in person, county documents, deed histories, notary logs. Something didn't add up. The notary's name, a woman who moved out of state 3 months before the signature date. The address, no match. The seal, looked off. I printed everything. Highlighted lines. Taped sticky notes across my kitchen cabinets. In this country, your signature is supposed to mean something. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. I called an old friend from my construction days, Ty. Now he worked with a lawyer in town who handled property disputes. Just gathering facts, I told him. Not ready to sue yet. Ty didn't ask why, just said, "Smart man." A few days later, I stopped for gas near the edge of town and ran into Mr. Halvers, a neighbor who'd lived down the road from the vineyard since before I moved here. He recognized me. "Heard you finally got that vineyard. Congratulations." I forced a tight smile. "Thanks, been a long road." He nodded, then leaned closer. "Funny thing, though. I remember seeing your mom and your brother meeting with some attorney fella a while back. Must have been a month or two before you bought it." I blinked. "You sure?" "Sure as sunrise. They were at Maria's diner, talking quiet. Had papers laid out. I remember thinking, that's some business talk for family, thought it was yours." I nodded slowly. "Appreciate you telling me." He patted my shoulder. "You take care, son." I drove away in silence. The words echoed louder with each mile, a month or two before I bought it. So this wasn't impulse. This was planned, premeditated. They'd been digging this hole for me before I even set foot in it. That night, I didn't turn on the TV, didn't call anyone, just sat in the truck again, parked in the same spot by the vineyard gate. The spring air had cooled, sky fading orange into blue, the kind of evening that used to feel peaceful. Now it just felt quiet. Heavy, but something shifted in that stillness, not sadness, not confusion. Resolve. They think silence is weakness. They've forgotten silence can also be strategy. If they built a trap for me, they're going to find out I don't step in twice. I parked by the old oak fence just as the sun pushed over the hills, casting gold across the vines I once called my future. The ground still held dew. It smelled like fresh soil and memory. I stayed in the truck, didn't step out, just watched. 3 rows in, I could almost see the spot where Dad and I planted the first vine. He handed me the shovel, called me his tough little girl, the only time I remember him sounding proud without saying much. How could something that brought me so much pride become the root of betrayal? I leaned forward, arms on the steering wheel, forehead resting against them. The worst kind of loneliness is being surrounded by people who pretend to love you. In this town, land wasn't dirt. It was dignity. It was your place at the table, your proof you mattered. Now it was my proof I didn't. I left just before the workers arrived and stopped at Bucky's Diner for coffee. I didn't plan to talk to anyone, but life doesn't ask for plans. The guy next to me at the counter stirred his sugar into a mug so aggressively I noticed. He wore a Vineyard logoed ball cap. I glanced at him. "You work up at Booker's place?" He nodded. "Yeah, been helping him redo the south side. Big plans, that one." I kept it casual. "Didn't know he was into farming." He snorted. "He's not. Said he's just doing what your mama always wanted. Said she told him from the start she never wanted a girl handling the estate. Said it wouldn't be secure. Secure. He meant strong. He meant male." I smiled, thanked him. Walked out before my hands shook. It wasn't that they didn't trust me. It's that they never intended to. It had never been about what I built. It had been about who I was and who I wasn't. I got home after dark, ignored 3 missed calls from Matt, an old friend from college, poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen table without turning on a single light. I didn't cry, just sat. And somewhere in the stillness, I heard her voice, Mom's, telling a neighbor once, "Some things are better suited for men. That's just how it is. They raised me to think I could earn it, that if I just worked harder, gave more, bent farther, I'd belong. But I wasn't meant to belong. You don't scream when your dignity is bleeding, you whisper and disappear." I picked up my phone and stared at her name. The same contact I'd dialed 1,000 times. Every holiday, every good morning, every, "Hey, did you eat?" I pressed and held. Deleted. No hesitation. The silence that followed felt more honest than any word she'd said in months. I stood, restless, paced for an hour, then sat again. Thoughts swirling. Was this about justice? Or proving I wasn't what they said I was? Would they say I was being emotional again? Too soft, too dramatic, too much? I'd heard it all before, but I remembered the nights I stayed late at the site to save money on labor. The times I passed up offers because I believed in this place. I remembered doing the work no one saw, believing that my value would shine through. Respect isn't inherited, it's demanded through resilience. They thought my silence was surrender. But that silence, they'd used it like a rope around my neck. Not anymore. The next morning I drove back to the Vineyard. Didn't even hesitate this time. Parked by the fence, stepped out and reached into the glove box. Pulled out a ribbon, faded green, tied like a bow. Dad used to wrap them around the vines when they bloomed. Said it made them feel cared for. I tied it to the corner of the gate. Didn't need words. Anyone else would have thought it was decoration. But if she saw it, she'd know. I haven't left. I'm watching. I remember. That night, as I walked back from the kitchen with a blanket over my shoulder, something on the floor caught my eye. An envelope, no name, just the Vineyard's logo printed faintly on the back. I looked around. Nothing. No knock. No footsteps. I opened it slowly. Inside, a blurred photocopy of what looked like an old draft of the deed. My name, clear as day, typed, signed, the version before it was changed. Someone knew. Someone didn't agree. I leaned against the wall, heart thudding in a rhythm I hadn't felt in weeks. Maybe I'm not the only one keeping secrets in this family. Dinner that night was quiet, almost too quiet. Mom had made her pot roast, the one she always served when she wanted everything to seem normal. Booker poured wine like a man trying too hard to be gracious. They asked me about work, about the weather, about my truck. Anything but what we all knew hung in the room like smoke. Booker leaned back, smiling. Feels good to have the Vineyard shaping up, really turning into something special. Our family project, right? I nodded, chewing slow, didn't correct him. I wanted to see how far he'd go with the act. Mom dabbed her lips with a napkin. It's been such a blessing to keep it in the family. The softest lies are spoken with gentleness. Every glance between them, every too long pause felt like a code I hadn't been given the key to. They weren't saying much, but what they weren't saying said plenty. After I left their place, I hadn't even made it home before my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Just a short message. Meet me downtown. I have proof. My hands tightened on the wheel. This wasn't some rumor or gut feeling now. This was something concrete. Someone was stepping forward. I drove to the back of Harold's diner, closed for the night, lights off inside. A figure stepped out from the alley. Eli, an old family acquaintance, ran errands for my dad when we were kids. He handed me a folded napkin with scribbled notes. Saw Lark meeting with a lawyer. This was weeks before the deed transfer. I was fixing her printer, door half open. I read his note by streetlight. Quote, "We need to shift the name before he realizes." He looked nervous. Didn't want to get involved, but you deserve to know. It hit me like a shovel to the gut. This wasn't passive. This was planned, orchestrated. Lark, my mother, the woman who raised me. I thanked him, tucked the note in my pocket, and drove home in silence. The next morning I was sipping coffee on the porch when my phone pinged with a local news alert. Small headline. Michael Granger to assist Booker Crow at Crow Vineyards. Not co-owner, assistant, a footnote in my own dream. I called the paper, asked for the reporter, and she said, "Oh, we just printed what the PR team sent over." That's what came in the release. I didn't yell, didn't need to. Being erased doesn't always come in big gestures. Sometimes it's just a word missing from a sentence. Sometimes that's enough to make your blood go cold. I texted Booker that afternoon, asked him to meet for coffee, said it had been too long. He showed up wearing a polo with the Vineyard's logo on the chest, sat down across from me like we were still 12 and nothing had changed. I kept my tone calm. Why was my name taken off the papers? He blinked, played dumb. What are you talking about? I didn't answer, just stared. He exhaled. Look, I never meant for that to happen. Maybe there was a mix-up. Paperwork gets messy, you know. And Mom, well, she had ideas about what was best. Did she? I asked. He fidgeted. She just wanted everything to stay stable. I was just trying to help. That's all. I didn't argue, didn't threaten, just watched him. He filled the silence with weak justifications. I filed each word away like ammunition. Didn't tell him I'd hit record on my phone the second I sat down. Sometimes you learn more from the lies people tell to your face than the truth they hide behind your back. That evening on my way home, I took the back road past the vineyard. Lights were on in the guest house. I slowed. Through the half-open blinds, I saw Lark. And a man in a suit. Documents on the table. Open folders. Quick movements when I stopped the truck. They switched papers fast. Whispered. Didn't look out the window. They didn't expect me to be watching. They never thought I'd come back this way. And right there, sitting behind the wheel, I realized something that hurt deeper than the stolen land ever could. They weren't just trying to take what was mine. They were planning how to make sure I never came near it again. That night, back at home, I poured myself a glass of water, sat in the study, took out Eli's napkin. On the back, more scribbles. Lines from what looked like lawyer notes. One line circled twice. Transfer Phase 2, finalized before fall quarter. Transfer Phase 2. They weren't done. I won't be either. What else have they planned that I don't know yet? That evening, the only light in my office was the desk lamp I had turned on hours ago. I spread out Eli's note, county documents, the draft deed, and my own journal side by side. My fingers trembled not out of fear but from the weight of decisions waiting. This wasn't just investigation anymore, it was confrontation day. I rehearsed silently. Calm voice, clear boundaries, no breakdown. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. I repeated that in my head until my jaw felt tight and my voice inside felt steel. I packed a small box, original vineyard plans, soil test reports, Dad's handwritten gratitude letter, and the copy of the deed before it was manipulated. I left the box beside the truck, hard case locked, evidence I refused to let slip away. At dusk, I pulled up to the vineyard office. Lights were dim inside. The staff had left. Mom and Booker sat at the desk, going over staff rosters. Booker looked up with a fake smile. When I walked in, I didn't ask permission. I placed the box on the grandmother oak desk between us and slid it open. "What was so wrong with the truth that you had to erase me?" I asked, voice low, controlled. They looked at each other. Mom's face went pale. Booker shifted. He said, "I never meant to remove you. Something must have gone wrong." His eyes darted toward her. Mom didn't meet my gaze. I leaned forward. "Eli heard you meeting months in advance, that you arranged the name shift before I even realized it. County records were altered. Notary was a ghost address. That's not an error. That's intention." My words landed with a slow certainty. Mom's voice whispered, "I signed it. I knew. I thought it would protect him." She turned to Booker. "He had debts. I feared what would happen." Her eyes locked on mine. "I did it for family survival." I felt a wave. Betrayal barbed with fear. She tried to cast it as protection, but that didn't heal me. I pushed further. "So my dignity was disposable. My name, my work, collateral?" Her lips quivered, but no tears. "You don't understand how hard men have it when they fail," she said. "I was trying to preserve something, not destroy you." I sat silent for a long moment. Anger cooled into clarity. "You chose your story. Now I'm choosing mine." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood and left, and closed the door behind me. Outside, dusk turning into night, I leaned against the vine trellis. I told Booker I'd be contacting a property attorney and go public with my stake. He laughed, soft but bitter. "You'll split the family over dirt?" he asked. I answered flat, "It's not about dirt, it's about identity." I walked away without slamming the door. I didn't need theatrics. My absence was firm enough. Later I walked out to the porch of my truck, watched the vineyard under moonlight. The sky was wide and empty. I felt a shift in me, no longer afraid to be seen standing alone. My phone chimed, a voice message from a cousin. "Heard something odd, call me when you can." My lips curved slightly. Maybe this was bigger than I thought. When I got home, an envelope slipped under the door caught my eye. No sender, just printed lines with spaces. I opened it. Inside, a typed letter, a cease and desist, from a trustee I'd never heard of. My pulse tightened. They were never planning to stop, and now neither am I. I arrived at the gala early, before the sun even bowed below the hills, dressed in a suit that felt too tight and with my evidence box locked tight in my hand. The hall glowed with soft chandeliers and polished floors. Staff greeted Booker like royalty, deep bows, warm handshakes, while I was ushered in politely, almost as an afterthought. I felt every gaze stray toward me, every whisper pause when I passed. My heart hammered, but my face stayed still. I repeated the father's old words in my head. "Appear where you were expected, but for the part they never saw you for." That phrase felt like both anchor and razor. It steadied me and reminded me of how invisible I had been made to feel. Every glance over a shoulder was a sting. Every hush in the crowd, a reminder they had already tried to erase me. Backstage was a maze of cables and floral arrangements, staff rushing past with last-minute checks. I slipped into the wings, eyes scanning the program page by page. And then I saw it. In the printed script, the headline read, "Honoring Booker for continuing father's legacy." No mention of me, no acknowledgement of my contribution. I pushed forward and confronted the stage manager, who clutched a clipboard and looked away. "That's what they submitted," she said quietly. No apology, no hesitation, just a statement. My silent rage simmered, but I swallowed it down. I slipped from the backstage halls, determination forming in my chest like a small fire. Lights dimmed, the crowd hushed. On stage, Booker stood tall, lifted a framed photograph of our father, and began, "This vineyard is my birthright. Mother and I built this together." The applause washed over me, the words reverberating like a hammer to the chest. He'd weaponized memory, turned our dad into a prop in his narrative. My dreams, my soil, my sweat, bargained for his image. I felt stripped bare under their applause. My soul felt auctioned to an audience that once believed in me. His speech glided into a toast. To Booker Crow, face of the future in wine country, cameras tilted toward him. He smiled, perfect, polished. I want to thank my brother for his assistance, he said. Michael Granger, assistant to Crow Vineyards. The crowd echoed polite applause. I should have reacted. I should have shouted, but my body froze in horror. A peer, leaning close, whispered, "You're literally invisible up there." My fist clenched. The public erasure wounded me deeper than any forged signature. They weren't stealing my land. They were trying to steal my identity. I stepped out to the terrace. The night air tasted free. My heart thundered in my chest, and as the voices of the gala spilled inside, I caught a silent truth. They don't fear me. They fear what I could unveil. Under the dim moonlight, I whispered, "Tonight, I don't just fight for what's mine. I fight to reclaim who I am." A hand touched my shoulder. I spun. The stage manager held a folded document. "And this was the one Booker gave me," she murmured, "with your name on it." My fingers shook as I took it. It was the original program draft, one that included me. The proof had been there all along, buried but not gone. The truth they hid. It was never gone. My heart pounded in the back row as Booker's name was called again, the spotlight skimming past me to land on him. Cameras tilted his way, lights brightened, and his face lit with practiced pride. I clutched the evidence box under my seat, fingers trembling. The audience whispered. Anticipation hung thick in the air. I replayed every injustice, every erasure, every lie layered above truth. I forced myself to settle the fear into steel. This evening was more than a show. It was my reckoning. You don't get the spotlight by hiding in the shadows. I repeated that mantra, steadying myself as the crowd leaned forward, expecting more. I was ready to claim what they withheld. Midway through the gala, the big screen flickered. The hall hushed. Corbin's name appeared under bold letters. The Stolen Vineyard. Gasps rippled as his expose loaded live. Documents, images, signature comparisons, even parts of my own notes. The original deed, intact. My hand went cold, my breath caught. Guests turned, stunned. Some faces darkened, others shifted away from Booker. He sat rigid, caught off guard. I recognized lines I had written privately. Someone had given him access. The narrative was cracking in real time. What was hidden no longer stayed hidden. When Booker was called to accept the honorary award, I stood and pressed the lav mic. My voice projected across the hall. "Your legacy is built on my work. Tonight, you're accepting my project as your own." The room froze. Behind him, blog images exploded onto the big screen. Evidence laid bare. Signatures matched. Emails exposed. The crowd gasped. Booker's steps faltered. Mom's face went pale. Cameras swung to me. I didn't pause. I held the mic steady. The stolen vineyard, the erased years, everything was visible now. The hall erupted into whispers, gasps, applause. Booker stammered apologies, reaching for control, but his voice faltered. I stayed calm, quiet, each phrase a hammer. Explain the swaps. Explain the lies. Explain why I was erased. The momentum shifted. Someone from the crowd shouted, "Let her speak!" Others stood in solidarity. The walls built around me cracked. Organizers scrambled behind us, murmuring into headsets. Producer faces whitened. Corbin stepped forward and gave me a subtle nod. He was with me. The audience fragmented. Part stayed loyal to Booker. Many now leaned toward me. The energy changed. For the first time, I felt victory growing beneath my ribs. Lights dimmed. A stranger approached and placed a sealed envelope in my hand. The host's voice broke through the tension. A letter just arrived containing new evidence about tonight's revelations. I tore it open under the cameras and gasped. I woke up before the sun broke the horizon. That in-between hour, quiet but tense, felt like standing on a fault line before a quake. My head was still full of the night before. The gasps, the screen lighting up with truth. Booker frozen like someone yanked his soul mid-sentence. I sat at the edge of the bed, envelope in hand. I hadn't opened it yet, just held it, felt its weight. Something in me knew the ground had shifted. Even the vineyard outside my window looked different. Not just rows of vines anymore. It looked like mine again. Or at least not his. I walked to the gate with that envelope under my arm, not as a messenger, but as someone finally reclaiming the right to speak. The wind carried that sharp morning scent of soil and cut grass. You can't hide from the dawn, I muttered to myself. Even lies vanish in daylight. But part of me braced. Truth doesn't always come clean. Back inside, I sat at the kitchen table and finally tore the envelope open. Inside, papers. Originals, a draft of the deed drawn up before the final edits. Booker had slid in, my name, in black and white, not some emotional memory, not a ghost of the past. Proof. I logged onto my laptop and started typing, hands surprisingly steady, pulled quotes from Corbin's article, then added my own voice. I wrote it like a letter, not a rant. To those who believed in a legacy, I began. Here's the truth. I scanned the draft deed, attached a photo, and hit send. Not just to the media. I sent it to everyone. Board members, longtime clients, Vineyard employees, local reporters. I didn't shout. I let the facts do the yelling. Within minutes, I started getting texts. People I hadn't heard from in years. One just said, "Saw this." I knew something never sat right. Others asked if it was real. The Vineyard crew, some of them lifelong employees, started whispering. Corbin's email pinged in. "They're scrambling," he wrote. "Their PR's on fire." I sat back, exhaled. I wasn't trying to burn anything down, just set the record straight. And then I found it. Tucked between the documents was an old Polaroid, curled at the corners. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. There I was, 19 maybe, squatting next to a sapling, dirt smudged on my jeans. Behind me, Dad, grinning, one hand on my shoulder. The caption in his handwriting, "First planting, 2005, Sawyer's vision." I stared at it so long my coffee went cold. No argument could beat that picture. I texted it to Corbin. 5 minutes later, he posted it with just one line. He built it. They sold it. The post caught fire. Locals started resharing, tagging the Vineyard's account. The story had stopped being just mine. It was becoming theirs too. For once, I saw Booker's armor crack in public. His eyes in that live interview weren't just tired, they were unsure. That rattled him more than any headline. I couldn't stop there. I drove to the mansion, not to yell, not for apology. I needed her to look it in the eye. The house was quiet. I found Mom in her study, where she always went when she didn't want to be found. I placed the printouts on her desk, the email, the Polaroid, the deed. She didn't say a word for a full minute, then finally looked up and said, "I never thought you'd use that picture." I answered without flinching. "You never thought I'd fight for what was mine." That silence between us, thicker than any scream, decades of quiet dinners, unspoken judgment, passing glances that sliced, all of it sat in the air like dust we never swept. Then came the heavy footsteps down the hallway. Booker. He walked in like he still owned the room. "Give me the folder," he said. No hello. I didn't move. "You want to settle this quietly," he offered. "For peace." I laughed once, not bitter, just tired. There's no peace built on someone else's erasure. He didn't take that well. Stormed out. Slammed the door on his way. Mom stayed. Just sat there, her eyes fixed on that Polaroid like it was a mirror she couldn't avoid anymore. Maybe the breach had always been there. We just never called it what it was. I left without saying goodbye. The sun was fully out now, the day in full swing. I'd barely made it to my truck when I saw the courier step out of a car. Dressed in khakis, polite but unreadable. "Sawyer Bennett?" I nodded. He handed me another envelope, this one heavier. I opened it right there, standing in the gravel, a court summons. Alleged contract fraud. My name in bold, my hands didn't shake, but I could feel the edge of the storm coming again. The courthouse smelled like old paper and varnished wood, nothing dramatic, just cold and clean. I stood before the judge, flanked by my attorney on one side and the weight of every lie on the other, accused of forgery. That part almost made me laugh. The irony felt so sharp I could have cut it into pieces and handed them out. My lawyer laid everything out, the timeline, the original signed deed, receipts from Vineyard equipment under my name back before Booker was even in the picture. I kept still, calm, present, but my chest carried a quiet thud that didn't let up. The prosecutor leaned in, looking me over like I was hiding something in my pocket. "Why wait until now?" he asked, voice too casual for a courtroom. I didn't look at the jury. I just looked at him. "Because," I said, "I believed family still meant something." The gallery behind us held faces I'd known for decades, harvesters, neighbors, even a couple of jurors from back home. They weren't loud, but I could feel their breath, their pause. Not sure if they were rooting for me or just hoping no one else they knew ended up here. And then, unexpected, Corbin walked in. Didn't nod to me. Just carried a slim folder and went straight to the front when the judge allowed it. His voice didn't shake, but he didn't force confidence either. Just told the truth. Booker asked me to erase Sawyer's name from the early files, he said. And I did. He pulled out a notarized copy of Mom's forged signature, presented it like a final move on a chessboard. Here's the voicemail, Corbin added, and hit play. Booker's voice rang out in that small room. Just make it look like it was always mine. No one will know. Gasps. Audible. From people who usually kept their mouths shut in public spaces like this. The judge called a recess right then and there. No gavel, no yelling, just a pause that said everything. I looked over. Mom stared straight ahead, not even pretending to meet my eyes. Her face didn't break, but her hands clenched tight on the seat rail. We reconvened 45 minutes later. I didn't have to say anything else. The judge spoke slow, each word placed carefully. This court finds in favor of Mr. Sawyer Bennett. The deed is to be reverted to his name. Mr. Booker Callahan is fined and restricted from operating under the Bennett Vineyard brand. Mrs. Callahan is placed on probation for her role in the misrepresentation of legal documents. There was no standing ovation, just a murmur of relief, maybe even disbelief. In its own slow, creaky way, justice had finally arrived. I stepped outside where reporters swarmed with microphones. I held up a hand. This wasn't about revenge, I told them. It was about being remembered accurately. One older reporter nodded slightly as if he knew what that cost. That's when Dad's old lawyer walked up. He looked like he hadn't aged a day, wore the same silver bolo tie I remembered from my teens. He handed me an envelope. He asked me to give you this if you ever got here, he said, and walked away. I sat on a courthouse bench and opened it. Dad's handwriting, shaky but clear. If you're reading this, it said, it means you fought for what we built. And I'm proud. My throat tightened. I couldn't stop them from what came after, the letter continued. But I tried to leave you enough to keep standing. Inside was a check, not for profit. It was labeled Legal Emergency Fund. I laughed once, alone on that bench. It wasn't about the money. It was knowing he'd seen this storm coming and prepared me, just in case. That afternoon, I walked the path through the vineyard, not to check on irrigation or assess damage, just to walk. That path Dad and I dug with our own hands felt alive again. Every step sunk deeper than just dirt. I reached the far plot, the one that had always stayed a little wilder, a little freer. That's where I'd start. Not another row of vines, but something different. I made a note to call the architect. Sawyer's Acres, I'd call it. A public retreat for dreamers left behind by family. For folks like me, Booker left town. Rumor was he moved east. No press, no goodbyes. Mom avoided interviews, and I didn't chase her down. I figured some silences should stay that way. I didn't throw a party, but I invited the ones who'd stood beside me. Corbin, Vineyard hands, Dad's lawyer, even a few old friends, for dinner under the pergola. As the sun dipped behind the hills, we poured wine, shared plates, and sat quiet when we needed to. Some laughed, some cried. Nobody talked about winning, just surviving. I didn't need their approval anymore. I wasn't trying to reclaim anything now. I was building forward. The night cooled. I stayed behind to blow out the candles after the last car pulled away. Alone under the dark sky, I looked back toward the land. Then I whispered it, not to anyone in particular. Maybe this vineyard was never just for her. Maybe it was for me, too.